And good evening. Welcome to another conversation at the table. I'm Chad Brusson, and I hope you have enjoyed your Saturday. I know I have. So the shelter in place is now another couple of weeks, May the 4th. And that means for those who are in a habit of going to Sunday services on a Sunday, it means we have another couple, at least 2 or 3 more Sundays. And even after that, we don't know what it's going to look like. In fact, it may end up being, in fact, it would most likely mean that when we do get back together, we are going to be doing so with masks. So get ready for church with face masks, because I'm almost sure that when we are allowed to meet together, that is coming. Tonight's Mythbuster, though, has to do with this whole idea of what it means to be church. What does it mean for us to do church? I'm not going to give a flippant answer to this. I get that there are well-learned men who've forgotten more theology than I have who have answered this question. And I know it's been kicked around even in the last few weeks as to just what is church. And it comes up is, the question is what we're doing on Sundays, when we meet online, when we get together on YouTube or Facebook, is that church? Again, when we're getting together online, is that what the New Testament means by church? And again, I'm not going to presume that I have the definitive answer on this, but I am going to give an answer. And it is part of our Mythbuster this evening. So, here we go. I am going to say this. First of all, I'm not making an argument tonight for online church all of the time. And I know that there are some, first of all, there are those that fear that that's what we're saying. If we say that what we're doing on Sundays it constitutes church, and if it truly is church, they're afraid then that people will start to think, oh yeah, okay, so that's all I need. I don't need to go to church when the restrictions are lifted. I'm not making that case, not meaning to make that case, in fact, if this is taken to mean that, then my words have been taken places they weren't meant to go. So I'm also going to say this, that community does include touching and tasting. So I'm not even making an argument that what we do on Sundays now through the internet, on Facebook and on YouTube and Vimeo and some of those other online church platforms, I'm not saying that this is possessing all of the benchmarks and all of those things that we have come to know and love about church. And the two senses that come to mind are touching and tasting. And does that happen in online church? Probably not the way we would think of church, probably not even the way the New Testament is talking about church in its fullest sense. But also the engagement of senses and what that has to do with church, that's another argument for another time. We're not going to go there. I'm also not arguing for the necessity of community, and sometimes those get folded into the same argument. Well, you don't have community, therefore it must be church, or then we're going to unpack this a little bit. What does it mean for community? Again, is this the fullest expression, online church, is it the fullest expression of community? I don't think anybody would say that. And so there are some that would make that argument, and some do make that argument for online church, online community, that all the benchmarks for what constitutes a true community in the New Testament's fullest expression of the term and the way it's portrayed, that is met by online church, and there are online churches. I'm not convinced. I'm not totally convinced of all of that. But what I am answering, and what this Mythbuster is here tonight about, is this. I've heard it more than once in the past couple of weeks. And I'm going to read you what I've heard. Those doing online church are doing fake church. I've heard that. I've also heard it doesn't count. It's not real. I've also heard it's not worship. And then the intimations are you're going through the motions. And I've also heard stop calling it worship because it's not. That there's no worship happening. Now, all of it, almost all of that is based on one line and variations, one line. And that is this. You aren't gathering, and a real church gathers. That's it. Now, once that's stated, then the arguments from the text come out. And there's a couple of verses that are typically given once we've gotten to this point. That a church gathers and you're not gathering. And that is this. The first one is, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there am I in the midst of it all. All right? I'm there present. Now, I come from a tradition in which that verse is never applicable unless you're in a church discipline situation. I don't believe that to be true. I do think, yes, the context is church discipline, but the reason it holds true for church discipline is that the broader context, and the broader context is church, that the broader principle applies. In other words, it's true for church discipline because it's true all the time. Where 2 or 3 are gathered, I am there. And so that verse is then used to say, hey, if online church is not church because you're not gathering, 2 or 3 have to be gathered, there I am. And then the second one is the passage we looked at last week. Hebrews 10:25. Again, we looked at that Mythbuster and how that verse gets taken out of context quite a bit. Hebrews 10:25 is not abandoning or forsaking the gathering together or the assembling together of yourselves. So there's an assumption there, presumption, and it's explicitly stated there that those who are doing Hebrews 10:19 through 25 are going to be gathered. And then that verse is then applied to this situation. You're not doing that, you're not gathering, so what you're doing doesn't constitute church. So the Mythbuster of this particular evening is this. Is that really what those texts are saying? And can you really make that argument from those texts? Those texts are using words like assembled and gather. Are those texts really saying what those who are running around saying this is fake church, is that really what these texts are saying? And I would argue they're not. I'm going to get to the argument as to why a little bit. It's further on down, but hold that thought because we're going to come back to it. I don't think you can make the argument for those texts. You can make the argument for gathering. You can make the argument for assembling. But I don't think you can make the argument about online church from those texts. That raises the question, the biggest question that's underlying all of this, and that is this. Is Jesus present in his word? Is Jesus' presence in his word what makes the word effective? What makes the word sacramental? And when I use the word sacramental, what makes the word salvific? Or what brings grace to a person when they hear the word and receive it in faith? Is it the gathering? Is it? Or is it Jesus? Is it Jesus himself that makes the word sacramental? Is Jesus sacramentally present in the word and when the word is preached? And I think you'd have to say from Romans and from John that yes, Jesus is present where the word is preached. So Jesus is sacramentally present wherever the word is preached, whether it is radio, whether it is a live gathering, whether it's the internet. If what you're hearing are the words of Jesus, you're hearing words that give you life. Because the words of Jesus are the words of Jesus, regardless of how you hear them, regardless of how it's being communicated to you, whether it's radio, whether it's internet. if they're the words of Jesus, then one of the biggest benchmarks for church is being met. Now, I realize there are some other benchmarks, and we're not going to get into all that. But one of the biggest benchmarks is that. Where is Jesus in all of this? Now, I had a chance to talk. I'm going to use this name. It's not meant to name drop, but it is important because he affirmed and confirmed for me some things I've been thinking about. I had a chance to talk, and it's been a while ago. It's been quite a few years. Had a chance to talk to J.D. Greer, and he's a pastor in the Carolinas. And J.D., the conversation was about something else, but he and I started talking about what is actually happening in the moment of preaching. And we had agreed that Jesus is present. Jesus is sacramentally present in the Word and in the Word preached. And he made this comment, because we then started talking about how that happens in our culture and in our context. His comment to me was this, that the moment that you turn on a microphone, the moment one uses a microphone is the moment that your voice waves have been changed and altered, so that the people listening on the other side, they are not hearing your voice, they are hearing an electronic version of your voice. They are not really hearing you. So if you're going to say that it's the sound waves of your voice that are sacramental, then stop using microphones. That was JD's comment. And stop using all this technology. Because once it enters into a microphone is the moment that they're no longer hearing your voice. And that stuck with me. That immediately got me to thinking, Jesus is bigger than all of this. Jesus can he obviously uses the microphone. We use him every Sunday. He uses the microphone to accomplish his purposes. If he uses the microphone, he's using the radio. If he's using the radio, he's using the recording. If he's using the recordings, he's using the internet. Jesus' words are Jesus' words. They are still salvific in the moment. That stuck with me, and I still hold that to be true. That has stuck with me, and here's something else. The gathering. Jesus' words are Jesus' words. What about the gathering? Well, first of all, in our online situation here in 2020, as we shelter in place, most of us are experiencing online church together as a family. If it's as a family, it's at least 2, probably 3. So now all of a sudden, now we're starting to push into where's the gathering and what's going on with the gathering, and there's all sorts of other things we start grasping for when we start to think about church and identifying church and what constitutes church. But at its basics, at its fundamental basics, and this goes back to Walter, this goes back to Luther. 2 or 3 gathered in my name, where the word is preached and the sacraments are administered. So if a family is gathered to place themselves under the word, then gathering, what does that mean? Is not Jesus there? And again, 2020, what constitutes gathering? This is 2020. This is not 1760. This is not 1240. This is 2020. We have electronic tools that allow us to gather electronically. And again, this is where I begin to feel my brothers and sisters who argue for online church. I begin to feel this. 2020, we got tools that allow us to gather. It's a different kind of physicality. But the ones and zeros don't change the fact that you and I are together. It's a gathering. I'm with you through the internet. So who's to say that that's not gathering? Who decides that that isn't gathering? I think that then, when we come to, where 2 or 3 are gathered, that passage in Hebrews 10, when we start to throw around assemble and gather, I think we're making arguments that are too much to bear on those texts. And that's why this is a mythbuster. So, the words of Jesus are the words of Jesus, regardless of how they are being conveyed, whether it's through a microphone, whether it's through the internet. And it's where they're being conveyed. If Jesus is united to his word in the word's proclamation, the word's preaching, and he is feeding himself to his people through that word and through the proclamation of that word, then he is doing so wherever the word is faithfully preached. He is doing it online. He's doing it even if that online service has been recorded. Because Jesus' word and Jesus' use of his word knows no boundaries. It doesn't know time and space. Zeros and ones can't stop Jesus from using his word to save his people, to be salvific for his people, to grace his people. Jesus feeding himself to his people through the internet, through the computer, through his word, through those tools. It's not bound by sight, not bound by sound, not bound by zeros and ones. So tomorrow, even though it's not optimum, even though it's not what we would want in community, and even though there are many, many other things that go into being a church and go into being a community, when it comes down to what is kernelly and what is at its basics, most basic church, tomorrow when you gather under the word as a family with others who are also gathering, that is church. Jesus is there to meet you. Jesus is there to save you. He is there to forgive you of your sins. He is there to grace you. He is there to feed you of himself. In that moment, he is there for you. He promised. And as you worship then, as a result of him coming to you and him blessing you through his word, that worship, he still hears it. That's still for him. It's still valid. You can vocalize your worship to the one who is feeding you through his word. And you can do all this just as if you were at the table at Los Fresnos, meeting at Los Fresnos United. All right? Online church, Jesus is still meeting us, feeding us, gracing us, forgiving us, giving us his life. The words of Jesus are the words of Jesus. Tomorrow, for you, he promised. Have a great Saturday. And this has been a conversation at the table. And we'll do this again come Monday. And again, join us right here on Facebook and YouTube tomorrow at 10:30 for the online service of the Table of Los Fresnos. You all have a great evening.